Is Iran preparing for the unthinkable? An 86-year-old supreme leader, a region on edge, and a world watching as regime change stops being a theory and starts looking like a playbook. One report now claims that if Iran's security forces fracture under pressure, Ali Khamenei has a plan to flee Tehran with his inner circle. That single possibility carries global consequences far beyond Iran's borders. And tonight we're unpacking what's really at stake, why this moment is different, and how close the world may be to a dangerous turning point. If this situation escalates, the rules of confrontation in the Middle East change overnight. If it fails, Iran's hardliners may emerge more entrenched and more dangerous than before. And if it succeeds, meaning the regime fractures or collapses, the shockwaves would hit energy markets, regional security, and global power balances simultaneously. This is not just about protests in Tehran. It's about whether the era of forced regime change has returned as an accepted tool of global politics. To understand why this moment feels so volatile, you have to look at what just happened in Venezuela. The United States forcibly removed President Nicolas Maduro and brought him to US soil, a move that shattered long-standing assumptions about sovereignty and restraint. For Tehran, this wasn't a distant Latin American crisis, it was a warning shot. Within hours, Israeli political figures publicly urged Iran's leadership to take notice. The message was unmistakable. No ally, no geography, and no precedent guarantees safety anymore. Iran's leadership has lived for decades with the expectation of pressure, sanctions, and covert action. What's changed is the sense that open, direct removal of leaders is back on the table. Khamenei has ruled since 1989, surviving wars, sanctions, internal unrest, and assassination campaigns. At 86, his authority is deeply institutional but also deeply personal. The system revolves around him. Any hint that he might need an escape plan signals anxiety at the very top. Reports suggest that if demonstrations grow and security forces fail to contain them, Khamenei would not remain in Tehran at all costs. Instead, he and his closest associates, including his son Mojtaba, who is widely seen as a potential successor, would leave the capital. That detail matters. It suggests contingency planning not just for unrest, but for regime continuity after a shock event. The comparison many analysts are making is with Syria. In December 2024, Bashar al-Assad, another long-standing US adversary and a close ally of Tehran, fled as rebel forces closed in. For Iran, Assad's fall was not just the loss of an ally, but proof that even heavily fortified regimes can unravel quickly when military loyalty fractures. Add to that Hezbollah's weakening in Lebanon and Maduro's removal, and Iran's regional safety net looks thinner than it has in decades. The protests inside Iran themselves are not new. The country has experienced waves of unrest over economic hardship, political repression, and social restrictions. What's different now is the international environment surrounding those protests. The United States under Donald Trump has adopted an openly maximalist posture. Trump has repeatedly signaled that he sees regime change not as a risk, but as leverage. After meeting Israel's Prime Minister, he publicly threatened renewed strikes if Iran rebuilds its missile or nuclear programs. He went further, warning that if Iranian authorities kill protesters, the US is ready to respond militarily. Israel's role is central here. Israel and Iran have already crossed a threshold that once seemed unthinkable. In June, Israel launched direct strikes inside Iran, killing senior military commanders and nuclear scientists. The United States joined in by bombing Iran's 3 main nuclear sites. While Trump declared Iran's nuclear program destroyed, Tehran proved it could still retaliate, firing hundreds of rockets at Israel, some of which penetrated advanced air defenses. The regime survived, but it emerged wounded and more suspicious than ever. This is where the Venezuela precedent becomes so dangerous. If Washington was willing to abduct a sitting president in Caracas, Iranian officials now have to assume that no red line is permanent. Analysts close to Tehran say this reinforces the argument of hardliners who believe diplomacy is futile and that only overwhelming deterrence can ensure survival. That could mean accelerating nuclear capabilities, not slowing them. Now consider two possible futures. In the first scenario, protests inside Iran intensify, security forces hesitate, and factions within the elite begin hedging their bets. Khamenei leaves Tehran, even temporarily. That alone could trigger panic, elite infighting, and rapid destabilization. Energy markets would react instantly, with oil prices spiking as traders price in chaos in one of the world's most strategic regions. Gulf states would scramble to secure borders. Israel would heighten alert levels. South Asia, heavily dependent on Gulf energy flows, would feel immediate economic pressure through rising fuel costs and inflation. In the second scenario, the regime clamps down brutally but survives. Washington and Tel Aviv interpret that survival as defiance. The logic of deterrence gives way to the logic of preemption. Iran, convinced that engagement leads nowhere, doubles down on missile production and possibly nuclear development. That raises the risk of a wider regional war involving Israel, US forces, and Iran-aligned groups from Iraq to Yemen. The Middle East becomes less predictable, not more. The global implications extend far beyond the region. For South Asia, especially countries like India and Pakistan, instability in Iran threatens trade routes, energy security, and regional diplomacy. India relies on Gulf stability for millions of expatriate workers and critical oil supplies. Pakistan shares a border with Iran and would face refugee flows and security spillovers if Iran destabilizes. China, Iran's major economic partner, would see its investments and energy interests threatened, complicating its already tense relationship with Washington. Diplomatically, the erosion of norms around sovereignty sends a message to every government under pressure. If leaders can be removed by force, trust in international institutions weakens further. Iran has already appealed to the United Nations, framing recent US actions as a fundamental breach of international order. But many in Tehran believe the UN no longer offers meaningful protection. Inside Iran, the leadership is projecting defiance. Khamenei continues to signal resistance rather than compromise. Yet defiance and preparation can coexist. Regimes often plan escape routes not because collapse is inevitable, but because uncertainty has become intolerable. The very existence of a Plan B suggests that the leadership recognizes how narrow the margin for error has become. What viewers should watch for next is not just the size of protests, but the behavior of Iran's security forces and political elites. Are commanders rotated or replaced? Are public appearances reduced or increased? Do allies close ranks or quietly distance themselves? These subtle signals often matter more than slogans or speeches. Power, in moments like this, is not just about missiles or armies. It's about confidence, perception, and timing. Iran's leadership has survived by convincing both its people and its enemies that it cannot be easily removed. The Venezuela operation cracked that illusion on a global scale. If regime change has truly returned as a tool of great power politics, then Iran is no longer just defending its system. It is defending the idea that survival is still possible in a world where restraint is fading. And the next move by Tehran or Washington may decide whether this standoff ends in recalibration or in fire. History rarely announces its turning points in advance, but sometimes the existence of an escape plan tells you more than 1,000 speeches.